Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named The Twilight Zone, 2002 Part 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The 11th story begins with a flower shop clerk named Tina, who had only borrowed a cup of laundry detergent, but George, a pet shop worker, instantly fell for her. However, Tina had no memory of this incident, and besides, she already had a boyfriend. Suddenly, George gave her a serious warning. She had to stop him from doing something. Tina, curious, asked what he meant by stop him. George then said he was going to kill her. Tina was stunned. She quickly grabbed the phone and called the police. But when she turned back, George had disappeared without a trace. The police didn't believe her strange story, and without any evidence or witnesses, they couldn't do anything. Tina couldn't even remember seeing him at the laundromat, except for a nameplate that read George and his long-sleeve blue polo shirt, which looked like a store uniform. Her best friend suddenly recalled a store and took her there. Sure enough, they found him inside. This was George. They contacted the police for questioning. But George denied everything. He claimed not to know Tina and that he had never been to the flower shop. Tina believed he was lying, mentioning the laundry detergent. The police asked George if he remembered it, but he denied it once again. During the police questioning, George provided a solid alibi, and multiple witnesses confirmed his whereabouts. The police were powerless. There was no evidence linking him to any crime. They told Tina that if she reported anything next time, they could arrest him on the spot, but until then, they couldn't treat it as a case. Tina was furious. Her best friend wanted to believe her, but George didn't seem like a killer, more like an ordinary guy. Tina thought he was hiding too well, which made people let their guard down. Her friend didn't argue further. Tina was alone counting stock when she suddenly heard George's voice behind her. Tina quickly glanced toward the exit, but George went on, recalling the night she entered another man's room and stayed there all night. When he brought up something from last month, Tina realized she had been followed. George was defending her, saying that the other guy wasn't a gentleman. Tina pretended to stay calm, moving closer as George seriously suggested a way out. She needed to break up with her boyfriend if she wanted everything to end. Tina immediately refused, but George insisted he was trying to save her. Tina was confused, but before she could react, she ran out. She collided with her boyfriend. When he learned George was inside, he angrily stormed in. The atmosphere grew tense as Tina anxiously waited. The boyfriend soon walked out, having found no one inside. George had disappeared once again. The man made a call confirming that George was on duty tonight. He decided to go have a word with him. Tina didn't want to make things worse, but her boyfriend insisted he could handle it. When her boyfriend left, Tina reluctantly went home to rest. But just as she was about to get into her car, she found George waiting nearby. Tina suppressed her emotions and asked what he wanted. George said he was saving her life, asking why she sent her boyfriend after him. He couldn't stop now, and for her own safety, Tina should run as far away as possible. Not just leave the city, but get as far away from George as she could. Tina couldn't just leave. Her entire life was here. But George warned her that if she stayed, he would kill her. Terrified, Tina quickly got in her car, locked the door, and called someone. George was still in the parking lot, but when she looked around, he had disappeared again. Later, Tina sat in the police station as they played the surveillance footage. Her boyfriend had confronted George, claiming it had nothing to do with Tina, or else he'd be facing a lot of trouble. Tina was confused. George had definitely been in the parking lot, but the police checked the time. The footage and the call made at 6:17 p.m. matched perfectly. There was no way George could have been in two places at once. Tina stared at the screen, disbelief written all over her face. In the morning, the boyfriend was finally released. Tina was so angry she got out of the car and left. He chased after her, suggesting that maybe all of this was just in her head. Even though Tina was reluctant to admit it, her boyfriend was powerless now. Tina had to rely on herself. Even her best friend started to have doubts. Since George didn't have a twin brother, it was impossible for him to be in two places at once. Everyone, except Tina, thought George was just fine. Her friend pulled a business card from her bag and suggested maybe Tina should see a psychiatrist, just to talk to someone. Tina quietly went to the store, and suddenly, George appeared, scaring her half to death. Now, George was the victim. He didn't know Tina, and he couldn't take it anymore. If she kept bothering him, he'd call the police. Seeing George's firm stance, Tina began to doubt herself. She looked at the doctor's business card and finally decided to call. The voicemail came on, and she left a message explaining what had been happening. They agreed to meet the next day. As she started her car to head home, the headlights of another car lit up behind her, and it started following her. Once back home, Tina locked the door and thought about hanging up her coat. But then she saw George standing right in front of her. She had already warned him, but here they were. Tina was shocked. How had his injuries disappeared? George only said he was trying to stop, but Tina didn't believe him. She couldn't hear him. Glancing at the door across the room, she slowly moved toward it. George explained that he was a good person, at least part of him was, but he couldn't stop. As he stood there, zoning out, Tina rushed to open the door. To her shock, she bumped into another George. She didn't have time to process the fact that there were two of them before she tried to shut the door, but it was too late. One George slammed her into the floor while the other was busy locking the door. He was something else entirely, a being with only one conscience, doing the best it could. But everything still unfolded as it did. The two Georges merged together, and George's conscience faded completely. He slowly advanced toward Tina, pinning her sexy body down and sealing her smelly mouth with duct tape. But Tina had already grabbed a pair of scissors and struck him hard in the side. George collapsed in pain, and Tina quickly stood up, whispering a plan. Just then, the police arrived and restrained him. George still couldn't understand where he'd gone wrong, wondering if it was the love that turned to hate, which led to this painful tragedy. Perhaps when you're too popular, you should listen to the voices around you. Even in the darkest of souls, there's a pulse of justice. That's what separates life from death. The 12th story begins with a die-hard gambler, Jonah, who was completely hooked into a game. After pushing all his chips into the pot, he was intimidated by the dealer's confidence and ultimately chose to fold, allowing the dealer to win with a trash hand. Jonah was furious. He'd been there for 18 months, and his pockets were completely emptied. Why was it that the dealer always won? He made a serious promise to his girlfriend. He'd quit after winning just once, and then they'd open a restaurant in Florida. But his girlfriend knew he was a gambler. She couldn't risk dipping into the bank savings, and even when he asked to borrow just $500, she refused. On his way home, feeling defeated, Jonah encountered a hungry homeless man who begged him for $5 for food. Jonah only had $3 and a bus card, so he couldn't help. The homeless man proposed a deal. They would flip a coin for the $3. Jonah, feeling cornered, agreed. The coin was tossed, and Jonah won. Still, he handed over the $3, showing the gentleman's behavior of a gambler. The homeless man, deeply grateful, gave him a strange old recorder, claiming it would bring good luck. Jonah missed the last bus home, so while waiting for the next one, he decided to test out the recorder. After pressing play, time itself began to rewind. The bus he'd just missed sped past him. He turned around in confusion, only to see the bus coming again, along with the newlywed couple he'd seen earlier. Shocked, Jonah missed his chance to get on the bus. He wanted to confirm it was no illusion, but as he turned to look at a woman walking away from him, he tested the recorder again. Time rewound, and this time, he avoided bumping into the woman. Jonah realized this was it. He had discovered the key to his fortune. When he got home, Jonah rushed to show his girlfriend the recorder, excited about his discovery. After a night of testing, he was sure this was his secret weapon. He demonstrated it to her. The time was 2:31 a.m., but he could rewind it to 2:30 a.m. The girl doubted him, thinking he'd had too much to drink. Jonah clicked the button, and time rewound. It was back to 2:30 a.m., and the girl had lost her memory of the last few minutes. Jonah realized he could rewind up to 5 minutes, enough to beat the dealer at the casino. Sensing his intention to ask for more money, his girlfriend immediately shut off the lights and went to sleep. Jonah knew he couldn't just keep borrowing money, so he rewound time again and tried a different excuse, but it was still rejected. After 49 tries, Jonah finally convinced her and successfully got 200. He promised he would leave once he won. The next morning, Jonah strapped the recorder to his leg, able to activate it with a toe tap. He returned to the casino, sat at the poker table, and without hesitation tossed in his chips. His opponent followed suit. When he lost the first round, Jonah wasn't disheartened. He muttered to himself that all the chips in front of them would be his soon. Jonah confidently revealed his winning method. He could rewind time. The other man, thinking he was crazy, dismissed his smelly bullshit. Jonah tapped his toe, and the world's time rewound. The dealer continued dealing as usual, but Jonah decided not to follow. He kept testing his luck, figuring out which hands could win. Eventually, he won all the chips on the table, his face beaming with excitement. However, the dealer was now suspicious. The dealer suspected cheating and ordered his men to bring Jonah to him. Jonah was escorted away from the table and taken to the dealer's private room. He tried to explain that he wasn't cheating, that it was all based on his own skill. The dealer smiled and said there was another game that night, implying that Jonah was just getting started. Jonah got his long-awaited shot at the final showdown. Not only would he be able to pay back the 200 to his girlfriend, but he'd also be pocketing a massive profit. He planned to use the $50,000 he won to wipe out the dealer once and for all. However, his girlfriend was concerned. She had never seen the dealer lose, not once. Jonah didn't let it bother him. He had an absolute secret weapon up his sleeve. Jonah took his seat at the poker table again. Each time he raised, it was no less than 2,000, and Jonah confidently called. The dealer, unusually, folded. Jonah revealed his cards, and sure enough, he lost this round. But that was just a trial run. As the dealer gave him a puzzled look, Jonah subtly tapped his toe. Time rewound to before the raise, and this time, he played a guaranteed winning hand. He won the chips on the table, repeating the process over and over. One by one, the other players lost everything, leaving only the dealer and Jonah. The dealer couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. Jonah seized the opportunity. It was time for the head-to-head duel. The dealer proposed they take a 5-minute break. He suggested stretching his legs before they continued. The girlfriend warned Jonah to know when to walk away, but he didn't want to quit just yet. Even though he had beaten the dealer, he didn't want to be seen as just a lucky coward. Jonah was determined to defeat the dealer completely. The girlfriend, on the other hand, just wanted to settle down and live a peaceful life with him. The money they had was enough to open a restaurant, but Jonah insisted on continuing, and finally the girl chose to leave. The showdown began. Jonah went all in, and the dealer, though he could match the bet, chose to fold. Jonah was in disbelief. He just won $180,000 with a pair of threes. The dealer turned over his cards, clearly stunned by Jonah's move. Then a strange smile crept across the dealer's face. The game was reset to before the last round of betting. This time, the dealer pushed all his chips in. Jonah's pair of threes couldn't compete with the dealer's 2 pairs. Just as Jonah was about to activate the recorder, one of the dealer's men jumped in, pulling the recorder from his hands. Jonah tried to defend himself, but then the dealer revealed his own recorder. Jonah froze, realizing the truth. In his pursuit of ultimate victory, he had forgotten the one unchanging rule of gambling. The dealer always wins, and in the end, he lost everything. The 13th story begins with a sports agent, Scott, having only stepped into the woods to use the bathroom. But when he returned, he was shocked to find that the highway had vanished, leaving only an endless expanse of towering trees. He called out loudly in a chicken voice, hoping to get a response, but there was nothing. His phone had no signal either. As he made his way through the brush, a look of disbelief spread across his face. Deep in the wilderness stood a house. He cautiously approached the yard and could tell that someone was maintaining the place. He pushed open the unlocked door, but the living room was still empty. Through the glass windows, he saw a small island in the distance. Just then, he spotted a woman named Marissa by the swimming pool, attempting to make a phone call. When she saw Scott, she hurried over, asking if he could help her find the highway since she was lost. Scott realized they had both ended up here by accident. His watch had stopped, and his phone was dead. He thought there might be a landline in the house, but Marissa, who was a real estate manager, had already checked everywhere. She was meticulous when it came to houses, but this one had no phone, no lights, no switches, no clocks. There wasn't even a power outlet, let alone cars or roads. The strangest part was that this place should have been flat ground, with no mountains in sight. They tried walking through the forest to find a signal, but still found no trace of anyone. The canopy above blocked their view, and they ended up back where they started, the house halfway up the mountain. Scott suddenly laughed, thinking it was some kind of reality show, making them survive in the wilderness. But Marissa didn't agree. Night soon fell, and the two of them began to recall their previous moments. They had both been stuck in traffic on the highway. Marissa had been in a heated argument with her fiancé and had left the car. She had expected her fiancé to chase after her, but he never did. She had walked all the way here, arriving an hour before Scott. Scott then shared that he worked as a sports agent, and the pressure of dealing with a star athlete switching agencies had been overwhelming. Marissa, too, had real estate deals to handle and a wedding to plan. Life's pressures had driven them into competition with each other, without ever considering whether they could actually catch their breath. After all, life wasn't something they could control. At that moment, Marissa started to piece things together. She went to the wardrobe to check, finding that all the clothes fit her perfectly. Time seemed to slow down. The next day, Scott observed the terrain around the house. It was surrounded by mountains, and the island was just as deserted. The house, however, always had abundant food. Over time, their bond grew stronger, and they relied on each other more and more. Marissa picked up her old wallet without hesitation, throwing it into the fire. Scott grabbed his phone and threw it into the flames, too. They both left their pasts behind, and in that moment, the only thing left in the world was each other. One day, as Marissa was planting flowers, a woman suddenly burst in. Marissa was taken aback, and all she could hear was the woman frantically calling for help. It left her completely stunned. The woman, Ricky, blurted out her story, explaining how her Tesla motorcycle had slipped out of control, sending her flying into the forest like a giant Barbie toy. Although the surroundings were beautiful, all she wanted was to leave as quickly as possible. Ricky attempted to make a phone call, but Marissa hurriedly reminded her there was no signal. Yet Ricky continued talking on the phone as if everything was normal. Marissa and Scott stood there in disbelief. How could there be a signal? But Ricky didn't seem fazed by their shock. Marissa felt something was off, wondering why Ricky barged in. The house was supposed to be for the two of them, and now with this unexpected third person, Marissa felt uneasy. Seeing that Scott wasn't concerned, she sternly warned them not to use the phone. Reconnecting with the outside world might cost them everything they had here. Scott finally agreed. Later that day, Marissa was stung by something. Ricky, still on the phone, walked over, hoping a friend could help her get out of the situation. She noticed Marissa needed help and mentioned that a wasp had stung her. She'd never seen a wasp before, and her words carried an edge of caution. Ricky advised Marissa to apply something to the sting. Sensing the tension, she quickly reassured Marissa that Scott wasn't her type. Ricky then asked if Marissa had no other family, to which Marissa replied no, but Ricky pointed out that she had a fiancé. Marissa shot her a puzzled look. Ricky offered to make a call for her if she provided the number, but Marissa refused and turned to leave to tend to the sting. Ricky went on about the outside world, describing how life felt too monotonous in isolation. Scott was beginning to waver. Marissa thought of stopping the conversation, but just then, a scorpion appeared on the table. Scott tensed, but Ricky found it rather cute. Later, Scott returned from gathering firewood and ran into Ricky, still on the phone, desperately seeking help. She mentioned how she had a rich life, her sister's wedding and basketball game tickets. Scott's curiosity was piqued. He wanted to know about the star player's transfer news, but Ricky didn't have the details. She could help him make a call, though. Scott was interested, but Marissa had warned him. He shook his head and declined the offer to make the call. Meanwhile, Ricky continued listening to a basketball game, and Scott's resolve began to falter. Marissa didn't know what to say. Suddenly, a snake appeared, and Scott sprang up, grabbing an iron rod to toss it outside. Marissa glanced at Ricky, wondering how the snake had gotten in. Scott was confused, but couldn't stand it any longer. Hearing the basketball game, he was eager to learn about the player's transfer. Finally, Ricky handed over the phone, her expression filled with sadness. Scott immediately dialed the number asking for the transfer details. Just then, the sky darkened and thunder rumbled. The house grew dim, and Ricky removed her coat. To Scott's shock, a snake was wrapped around her arm. She swiftly took back the phone from him. Marissa realized it was too late. Technology had made her work so much easier. Scott couldn't understand what was happening. Ricky explained that this opportunity meant they could live freely without worries, but humans like Scott were always greedy, ruining the life they had been given. In the stunned silence of Scott's gaze, Ricky ended their peaceful paradise. Ricky turned out to be their temptation here. Afterward, Scott found himself back on the traffic-jammed highway with no sign of the forest behind him. Instinctively, he checked his pockets. His phone was gone. Just then, he heard arguing from the car nearby. He looked over and saw Marissa and her fiancé. She thought Scott looked strangely familiar but couldn't remember ever meeting him. Her phone was also missing. Scott felt the same confusion, but as the car window slowly rolled up, he was swept back into the busy modern world. The 14th story begins with a man named Gabe who was consistently down on his luck. 2 car accidents in a month and no money to cover the repairs. As he pushed the door open to come home, he heard his daughter's heartwarming talent. Gabe couldn't bring himself to crush his daughter's confidence, so he confided in his wife about the accident. His wife's face turned pale. They hadn't paid the insurance in 3 months, which meant they couldn't claim compensation. Gabe had never cared about the account balance. The house was falling apart and the baby was a money pit. With his current salary, they were barely scraping by. Gabe had been up for a promotion and raise, but his competitor had already held the meeting, and Gabe had been 2 hours late, ultimately losing the opportunity. Though the wife wanted to support her husband, she couldn't bear to let the children suffer. Gabe kept reassuring her that things would get better, calming her down. Just as he was feeling down, a man unexpectedly started spraying pesticides on his lawn, leaving him dumbfounded. He quickly confronted the man, asking what he was doing. The man seemed surprised, thinking that Gabe shouldn't be able to see him. Maybe this was all just in his head. The man suggested that the car accident had given Gabe a second sight. But how could the man know about the accident? The man didn't offer any further explanation, focusing instead on finishing his work. When he resumed spraying the pesticides, Gabe was on the verge of exploding. His wife called out that dinner was ready and then asked what was wrong in confusion. Gabe couldn't believe it. There was a strange man right in front of him, but his wife couldn't see him. The man said no one should be able to see him, not even Gabe. Gabe was completely confused. He just wanted to understand what was happening. happening? The man didn't have time to explain. If he didn't finish his task, he'd fall behind schedule. He then sprayed more pesticides on the lawn before leaving. Later, Gabe talked to his best friend about it. He really felt like the unluckiest guy alive. The friend tried to comfort him, saying it wasn't bad luck. He was just a pure failure. Gabe couldn't hold back anymore. He had to make things better, or his marriage with his wife would be over. The friend saw Gabe's frustration and mentioned a business opportunity. If Gabe left the company's truck unlocked, the friend could take the items from it. Old TVs and speakers that were worth a lot. Gabe didn't want to commit a crime, but the friend's words stung. The company had insurance for stolen items, and Gabe was at rock bottom. Despite that, he still refused the idea. The next day, while delivering goods as usual, the man appeared again. Seeing that Gabe could still see him, the man quickly walked over to a vase, throwing it to the ground. Gabe was shocked. The homeowner heard the noise and rushed over, finding the broken pieces. Gabe was left speechless. Since no one else could see the man, it would only seem like Gabe had done it. His wife, hearing of the double misfortune, became even more upset. They hadn't even received the insurance money from the last accident, and now there was a broken vase to deal with. Gabe hurriedly explained that it was the man in the jumpsuit who caused it. Every time the man showed up, he made Gabe's life a mess. The wife broke into tears. She had always tried to support him, but Gabe kept blaming others for his mistakes, even imagining someone to take the fall. She couldn't take it anymore. Gabe quickly tried to convince his wife to stay, promising to make a change. But then a call came in. The company had reimbursed for the vase, and the money would be deducted from Gabe's salary. That was the last straw. Gabe turned to his friend. The plan his friend suggested was simple. Gabe just had to leave the unlocked truck, and his friend would take care of the rest. Gabe desperately needed the money to save his family. Otherwise, his wife would leave with the kids. That night, Gabe continued his deliveries, while his friend secretly drove to the side to load the goods into his truck. Gabe's job was to stall inside and help organize the items for free. But things weren't going as smoothly as they had imagined. The friend complained that the goods were too heavy for him to carry alone. Just then, Gabe accidentally spotted a man outside, sneakily letting the air out of the truck's tires. He quickly pulled his friend over to show him. The man vanished before their eyes, leaving behind the flat tire. Gabe had no choice but to let his friend go ahead alone while he confronted the man. The man explained that he had to get to the other side of the city, or the consequences would be unimaginable. If they succeeded in the theft, they'd be caught by the police and thrown in jail. This would be their fate. Gabe froze. It seemed his miserable life was being written by someone else. He immediately found the man's weakness, demanding that if he wanted to keep working, he needed to take him to meet this so-called author. The man agreed, and they walked to a nearby pool. After a quick slap from the man, a blinding light appeared, and in front of them stood a massive building that seemed to stretch on forever. This was the headquarters. The man told Gabe that God didn't work there. He would have to go up on his own. The author was in room 2173. Gabe wasted no time and went straight inside. The people there were rushing around, and after a bit of struggle, he squeezed into a high-speed elevator and arrived at the door. Inside, a woman was working. Gabe introduced himself, and the author immediately froze. He wasn't supposed to be there. Gabe didn't care. He asked if the author was the one writing his life. The author explained that she wasn't just writing Gabe's life, but 5,999 others as well. She had to finish by midnight, or else many people would be left with nothing to do the next day. He was supposed to be part of a robbery plot, and if he refused to follow through, the entire storyline would have to be rewritten. Gabe didn't want to be controlled anymore. His life should be his own, including all the decisions and opportunities. The author quickly countered, saying that creating on the fly was against policy. Gabe grabbed a file and sat down, demanding that if she didn't give him control, the lives of 6,000 people would be paused. The author then called her superior, but the answer was still a no. They couldn't change the policy. They said the world ran smoothly only when lives were controlled. Gabe disagreed. It was because of this foolish bureaucratic system that people like him were treated unfairly. He just wanted to change that. Besides, the author had to write so many stories every day. If more people were allowed to make their own decisions, she'd have more free time. The author didn't mind cutting down her workload. After some thought, her superior finally agreed to let Gabe control his own life. Gabe was ecstatic and said goodbye to the author. As his wife was preparing to leave, Gabe had already begun planning his future. With the experience he'd gained from his job, he knew he could start his own business and have an edge over his previous company. His wife was confused about what they were doing. Seeing that his wife was about to leave, Gabe didn't make the same promises of change as before. He had already taken action, no longer avoiding responsibility, and was confident he would succeed. His wife smiled, touched by his determination. She had always believed in him. Perhaps the world was a stage, and humans were merely actors, but Gabe had proven that sometimes people can grab the pen and write their own life. The 15th story begins with a godlike figure named Anthony who could ignite a man's body using his thoughts. He slowly widened his eyes, and the only sound left in the air was the anguished screams of pain, until his mother, Agnes, desperately begged her son to end the man's suffering. Anthony finally transported the man to a cornfield. The boy watched helplessly as his father died right before his eyes, unable to do anything. Since the age of 6, Anthony had ruled the earth, and now 40 years had passed. The world had been reduced to this small town. No one dared defy him anymore, for he could read the dark thoughts in people's minds. His daughter Audrey hated what her father had become. She looked at a family photo from the past, causing the glass to suddenly crack open. Agnes was left stunned, realizing her granddaughter had awakened her powers. At this joyous revelation, she instructed Audrey to hide her abilities, making sure Anthony never found out. But Audrey wasn't worried. Her father couldn't read her thoughts. Agnes saw this as an opportunity for revenge, and Anthony had no idea. Audrey was curious about the cornfield. Her father told her it was a beautiful place, but he only sent people there when he was angry. Anthony said it was for their own good, so they wouldn't be hurt again. Once someone was sent to the cornfield, he couldn't bring them back. To avoid drawing attention, Agnes suggested she and Audrey go for a walk. Anthony reminded them to hurry back, as they still had bowling to play that evening. Agnes led Audrey to her friend and demonstrated her abilities. Audrey slowly opened her eyes, and in an instant, a huge boulder disappeared. The two shared an excited look. This was the hope of the town. Agnes had finally found someone with magical powers who could eliminate the monster she had birthed. She had always felt guilty. If she had been brave enough back then, none of this would have happened. The woman comforted her, saying it wasn't her fault. As long as Audrey gained enough strength, she would be able to destroy the monster. Meanwhile, everyone had gathered at the bowling alley, eager to make Anthony happy, praising him endlessly. But Anthony noticed something was off. Why were they all staring at his daughter? Agnes immediately sensed the danger and quickly explained that they were just so happy, their minds full of good thoughts. But Anthony wasn't convinced. Agnes quickly found the woman and scolded her for leaking the news. The woman had just wanted to give the people hope, but Audrey wasn't ready yet. If she was discovered now, the consequences would be severe. Just then, Anthony grew tired of playing and invited the man to join him. The others looked uneasy. The man didn't dare to take a shot, fearing he would be sent to the cornfield. Anthony wasn't pleased, and as the man trembled, he begged for mercy. Agnes stepped forward to plead on his behalf, but her son quickly shot her down. Everyone knew the consequences of angering him. As Anthony prepared to use his powers, Audrey invited her father to play a marble game. Seeing his sweet daughter, everyone couldn't help but praise how well she was raised. The man was spared for the moment. Later that night, Anthony confronted the woman. He demanded to know what she had talked about with his mother and then slowly widened his eyes again. Meanwhile, Agnes and Audrey were looking through an album, marveling at the photos of New York and the skyscrapers. They could walk into stores and shop, and there were cars they had never seen before, but all of them had been transported to the cornfield. Turning the page of the photo album, Agnes was wearing the watch her husband had given her, but it had already been taken away. Upon hearing this, Audrey's eyes widened in shock as the watch appeared out of nowhere on the table. It was the very same one from the photo. She gasped for breath in disbelief. Her granddaughter could bring things back, something her son had never been able to do. At that moment, Anthony stormed back into the room, clearly aware of the secret. Audrey feared he was going to harm her grandmother, but Anthony assured her he wouldn't lay a hand on her. He simply wouldn't trust her anymore. His daughter was his true love. He then demanded Audrey send the album back, and Agnes reluctantly agreed. Audrey slowly widened her eyes, and the album disappeared from her lap. Anthony grinned widely. Seeing that his daughter could do the same thing as him, Anthony decided to hold a town meeting. The next morning, everyone gathered at the bowling alley where the woman was tortured to the point of madness. This was Anthony's way of dealing with the despicable people, and no one dared to oppose him. They all praised his actions, but it didn't calm his anger. Anthony pointed out 4 people who would be sent to the cornfield. Agnes could no longer stand it. It was all her fault. She had endured for 40 years, watching everyone she loved sent away. She regretted giving birth to Anthony every day. If anyone deserved to be sent to the cornfield, it should have been Anthony. Anthony looked at her in disbelief, but Agnes quickly rushed to Audrey's side, urging her to use her power and send Anthony to the cornfield. But Audrey refused. Instead, she sent the man who wanted to harm her father to the cornfield. Agnes completely broke down. Her granddaughter, too, was a monster, and she disappeared in a scream. Things quickly spiraled out of control. Audrey began to read the vile thoughts of the others. No one liked her. Even Anthony couldn't hold it together anymore. His daughter had sent everyone away. At that moment, the two of them played the piano with their thoughts. Anthony, no longer interested in the game, suddenly felt lonely. Seeing this, Audrey had an idea. She stared wide-eyed out the window, and Anthony heard a strange sound. He went outside to find a plane flying overhead. Audrey had brought everything back, including all the countries and cities. Now they could visit New York together. Anthony no longer felt lonely. Just then, a man came up and asked for directions. Anthony had never been anywhere else. This was going to be interesting because today was going to be a great day. The world had welcomed 2 world-ending sorcerers, and when you met them, it was better to have some good thoughts in your head, or you might just find yourself sent to the cornfield in the underworld. The 16th story begins with a group of small-town residents who were planning for the holiday when everyone's phone suddenly rang at the same time. It felt odd, and as if that wasn't enough, the lights in the houses began flickering, children's game consoles suddenly shut down, and bulbs and glass shattered. After everything settled, they slowly got to their feet to assess the situation. It seemed they had been hit by some kind of attack that disrupted the entire street's power supply. One resident, Will, guessed that a transformer had exploded, but what could explain the simultaneous phone calls and game console failures? Everyone's phones were unresponsive. The fat kid joked that it was like Independence Day, and aliens had invaded and destroyed everything. No one believed such nonsense, though. The woman suddenly recalled something her husband had said. 2 days ago, he had issued an orange alert, warning that terrorists were plotting something on the internet. Will thought she was just rambling. Not to mention, her husband was overseas, and a terrorist attack would make no sense in this small town. The group couldn't come up with any answers. It was almost time for the kids to get out of school. When the couple tried to start their car, the engine wouldn't turn over. This wasn't just an isolated incident. All the cars in the town were unresponsive, and chaos broke out. The school was 15 miles away, and walking wasn't an option. The woman speculated that some kind of electromagnetic pulse had shut down the computers and halted power transmission. Since all the vehicles contained chips, that could explain the situation. Will quickly tried to reassure another resident, Dylan, that there was no invasion and that everyone in the town was friends. But Dylan wasn't so sure. He pointed to the new neighbor's house across the street, suspicious of their behavior. In a situation like this, with the neighbors standing outside, they should have checked to see what was going on, unless they already knew about it. Will tried to explain that the neighbors were probably just scared, but Dylan insisted on investigating. To avoid causing panic, the two of them walked over to the neighbor's house. When they knocked on the door, a hand flashed through the window, clearly indicating the neighbor didn't want to answer. Will explained their intentions, but still there was no response. Seeing the neighbor's unwillingness to cooperate, Dylan switched to a more aggressive approach. But still, there was no answer. With no other choice, they gave up and left. As night fell, the silence was almost eerie. No music, no shouting, nothing. The neighbor's house stood out, oddly out of place. Maybe they just wanted to be left alone. The wife scolded her husband for being too calm in such an unusual situation. Meanwhile, Dylan had gathered the residents. There was still no sign of rescue, and they couldn't just sit around waiting. They had to protect their families, even if that meant picking up weapons. As he went on and on, Will rushed over to stop him. Dylan, annoyed, tried to attack but missed, and Will knocked him out with a single punch. Furious, Dylan smashed a bottle and charged at Will. The two started wrestling their muscles. Then, out of nowhere, a bright light appeared in the distance. The group froze in shock as a car drove past them, heading straight toward the neighbor's house, and inside the house, there was still electricity. The group started to believe Dylan's words. Those people must have known what was coming, which is why they were already prepared. But what kind of terrorist would be foolish enough to let them see these things? The woman speculated that it was some kind of beacon, signaling the location for the bombing. But if that were the case, those people would still be killed in the explosion. Dylan didn't want to think of the terrorists in the way most people would. He just wanted to rush in and take them out. Will tried to stop him, suggesting that they hold off for now. He didn't believe the neighbors were terrorists, and this time he was going to go in and get answers himself. Will knocked on the door, and it wasn't long before someone opened it. The group anxiously watched as Will successfully entered the house and began talking to the family. A short while later, he came back out. The others were eager to know what he had learned. Will said they weren't terrorists and that they worked for an electronics company. As for why the car still worked, the family didn't have an explanation. Just because they hadn't lost power and still had a working car didn't automatically mean they were terrorists. The family was willing to come outside, but Will told them not to. Dylan immediately lost his temper at this. The fat kid, frightened, tried to stop his father, but he felt something was off. Will had been protecting that family, and he wondered if Will was involved with them too. His wife quickly defended him, saying that they couldn't risk their lives just to protect terrorists. At that moment, Will felt anger rising within him. How could they think he was a terrorist? He wondered who was the one stirring the pot. Everyone in the group was suspicious, even the woman's so-called captain husband, whom no one had ever seen before. And this was exactly what the terrorists wanted, making the town's residents distrust one another so they could win without a single shot being fired. Will wasn't afraid of death. He told Dylan to shoot, but Dylan eventually put the gun down. Just then, the fat kid spotted something strange, a device falling from the roof. Dylan yanked it off. It was a surveillance camera, and it was attached to their house. The family worked for an electronics company, and now everything pointed back at them. There was even a hidden listening device, which practically confirmed their status as terrorists. Dylan led the charge, but Will still tried to reason with them, though no one was willing to listen. The group marched on, with Dylan shouting for the family to come out, but there was no response. In the current situation, even if they were innocent, they wouldn't dare come out. As the group hesitated, the fat kid was the first to charge forward. He smashed the window with a stick, and Dylan poured gasoline inside. Will tried to stop them, but Dylan shoved him aside. He tossed a match into the house, and it ignited instantly. The group rushed in, while the family cowered inside, trembling. Will could only watch helplessly as the others reveled in the chaos. Meanwhile, inside a hidden truck, two soldiers watched the scene unfold on a screen. The officer shook his head in frustration. He had hoped that this group would have been able to handle a house that hadn't lost power. If the safety tests for ordinary civilians were this intense, they would all be in big trouble. The problem wasn't that there was only one person holding out. It was that they didn't have enough reason to hold out. In moments like these, when you can't identify the lurking enemy, your brain starts to imagine one, because fear makes us alert, but it's also fear that causes division. The 17th story begins with Donna having just finished giving herself a facial massage when she suddenly received a call from her son's school informing her that he hadn't shown up for class, but she and her husband had clearly seen him board the school bus. Panicked, Donna rushed to the police station for help, showing them a photo of her son. Just then, a radio host appeared behind her. Donna hoped to rally the public's help, but it turned out they weren't reporters. They were filming a game show. The host explained the rules to the audience. The entire crew was ready. Donna had 60 minutes to find her son, and each location would provide clues. If she won, she would earn a $500,000 prize. Donna was completely confused. She just wanted to know where her son was. The host then asked her the burning question, how much did she truly love her child? The screen displayed a video of her son being kidnapped by a masked man, shouting for his mom. Donna's heart broke. She immediately turned to the police for help, claiming that her child had been abducted, but the police told her they were powerless. The game show was legal and didn't qualify as child abduction, but they could offer her the first clue. Donna couldn't hold back anymore. She just wanted her son back. The host reminded her that the first clue was critical. Reluctantly, Donna agreed to participate, and the show's crew quickly set her up with the necessary equipment. The countdown began, and the police read out the first clue, a horse of a different color. This was the last place Donna's son had been seen. The host kept encouraging her from the sidelines, urging her to focus and think through the clue. As Donna frantically searched her mind for another word related to a horse and a color, it suddenly clicked. It's Green Hill Park. That had to be the right answer. She hurriedly got into the show's car and called her husband, urging him to cancel his interview for the day. Her son had been taken by the people from the game show. Her husband said he'd fly back, but the call's signal started to fade, and Donna, devastated, pushed the camera away. She realized now that she could only rely on herself. The group quickly arrived at Green Hill Park. Donna asked everyone she passed, but they all claimed to have not seen anything. The host told her to stay calm and assured her that someone here would provide a clue. Donna, fueled by anger, began digging through the area and soon uncovered a suspicious street vendor. The man, realizing he had been exposed, pulled out a card and read out a character's name. Donna recognized it, the Lord of the Rings. She'd watched it with her son more than 3 times, and it proved her love as a mother. But what did the clue about the Lord of the Rings mean? She only had 41 minutes left. The host reminded her to focus on what had a ring in it, and that rings could also be linked to the sound of a bell. The Lord of the Rings ruler, the creator, tied everything together, the inventor of the first working telephone. Combining all the clues, the destination pointed to a red building, the site of the first ever telephone. Clearly, this was the right answer. Donna raced toward the building, while the host praised her for the impressive determination she'd shown. Donna rushed into the building, calling out for her son. She suddenly wondered what would happen if she failed, what the consequences would be if she didn't find her son within the time limit. The host, however, replied that he didn't know. He was just the host of the show. Donna didn't want to waste any more time talking to him. At that moment, a suspicious man appeared in front of her. As he was about to pull out another clue, Donna completely lost it. The man asked her what was something that had tasted the same for 3,000 years, besides water. Donna, flustered, guessed milk, but the man shook his head, saying no one had tasted milk from 3,000 years ago. Donna was certain the answer was milk, but the situation was spiraling out of control. The host rushed forward to intervene, but just then the son's voice echoed from a distance. Donna rushed to the window and saw the masked man forcing her son into a car. By the time she got outside, the car was already speeding away. Donna jumped into the driver's seat and chased after the red car. The host reminded her that even if they lived in a world without children, Donna would still be able to find her son. But the red car suddenly skidded off the road and crashed into the sidewalk. Donna rushed to the scene. The masked man immediately abandoned the car and ran off. By the time she reached the vehicle, it was too late. Medical personnel arrived and started treating her son, but no one expected things to turn out like this. The police didn't seem to take it seriously. Donna, furious, threw the equipment aside. Looking at her severely injured son, she felt her heart shatter. But the host was still encouraging everyone to stay strong. He reminded Donna that she couldn't let that bastard go, not just for her son, but for herself as well. The situation wasn't over. Donna could take the $500,000 and leave, or she could chase after the masked man. They would provide more specific clues, and if Donna managed to catch him within 15 minutes, the prize would increase to $1 million. The host then pulled out a silver handgun. Donna needed to prove how much she loved her son by catching him. Seeing her son in this condition, Donna grabbed the gun and rushed toward a car, no longer willing to waste any more time. The man, frightened, immediately gave her the answer to the clue. Donna followed the lead to the street and, sure enough, found the target. The masked man, seeing she was catching up, sped up even more. The host and the others quickly arrived on the scene. Donna dashed through the chase like a hurdler, only thinking of taking down the bastard. Eventually, she tackled him inside a house. After a violent struggle, the masked man removed his black hood, and Donna's face showed disbelief. Her husband had been the one who kidnapped their son. He explained that the show's producers had offered him $3 million to help him and his son escape. He tried to justify his actions, but Donna was livid. He had almost killed their son. Whether intentional or not, he had just abandoned his son, who was only left with a few broken bones and some scratches. The husband showed no remorse, saying $100,000 won't fix these little injuries. If Donna hadn't caught him, they would have had $3 million. Donna, seething with anger, shot her husband. To her shock, the gun actually went off, and she collapsed to the ground, completely shattered. The host rushed over, congratulating her on winning $1 million. With that money, she could hire the best lawyer. The show came to a close, a wild and boundaryless entertainment spectacle. It was filled with raw, real drama and outrageously high rewards, but it also carried the potential to plunge into an endless abyss. The 18th story begins with a man named Harry often suspecting that something was wrong with him, but he had never shown any symptoms. His physician, Dr. Leslie, could only prescribe some placebo pills with no real effect. But today, Harry seemed different. His entire body was tense, his hand gripping a black case tightly. Leslie asked about his symptoms, but Harry couldn't put them into words. He then took off his sunglasses, revealing his bloodshot eyes, as if his blood vessels had ruptured. Leslie thought he had injured his eyes, but Harry shook his head. He picked up a scalpel and gently sliced his finger. Leslie was horrified and quickly searched for bandages, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. Harry believed he might bleed to death, but that wasn't the worst of it. Slowly, he lifted his shirt, and Leslie was stunned to see his skin covered in swollen lumps. She had never seen anything like this. Harry was on the verge of collapse, worried that his worst fear had finally come true. Leslie couldn't find the cause of the issue either. She decided to report the situation to her supervisor. At first, Dr. Leslie thought it might be a blood disorder, but everything else seemed normal, and there shouldn't have been any clotting issues. When the supervisor found out the patient was Harry, he seemed unconcerned, suggesting it could just be a psychological symptom. He then recommended a psychiatrist as he had a medical conference to attend that day. Harry's bleeding wouldn't stop, and with his pessimistic mindset, he was at risk of harming himself. Dr. Leslie quickly went to his room. The initial examination didn't show any bacterial infection, which only made Harry more anxious. He was terrified of contracting some rare disease, which was why he rarely left his house, and the housekeeper took care of his daily needs. At that moment, he suddenly worried he would pass the disease to the housekeeper, since the Black Death had started the same way. Leslie reassured him to stay calm. It was still too early to confirm it was a virus. They needed more tests to know for sure. Harry finally settled down and lay in bed. Dr. Leslie started to organize the documents to fax to the Disease Control Center. The nurse in charge, curious, asked if Harry was still a bookseller. Leslie sensed something was off and rushed to Harry's room to wake him up. If he never left the house, the only way books could reach him was through the mail. Harry was pleased that she guessed correctly, but he still wasn't giving her the full picture. Leslie insisted that he tell the truth. Eventually, Harry opened the suitcase, which only contained a single book. He pulled the book out of its plastic wrapping. It was a novel titled The Khalil Gibran Task, and he claimed that his virus didn't come from Earth but originated from this book. Dr. Leslie found it absurd but still read the contents. The task in the book led to a catastrophic mutation. They had been infected with a malicious virus. The first stage of symptoms included uncontrollable bleeding and strange black skin lumps. Harry's symptoms were a perfect match for what was described in the book. Their only hope was to find an antidote to remove all the blood from the body before the virus took full hold. Harry thought she would believe him, but Leslie still thought it was just a fiction. She stood up and walked out of the room, determined not to waste any more time and to have Harry transferred to a psychiatric hospital. At that moment, a woman burst into the room, screaming that she had collapsed from heart failure. The nurse quickly unbuttoned her shirt, revealing skin lumps identical to Harry's symptoms. Dr. Leslie told everyone to step back to avoid contamination. When the nurse saw the woman's ID, she realized the woman was Harry's housekeeper. Before Leslie could process what was happening, the woman's breathing stopped, just as the book had described. Leslie quickly removed her jacket, and to her shock, skin lumps had appeared on her own hands. The others recoiled in terror. The fictional disease had become a reality. The area was placed under forced quarantine, and the possibility of airborne transmission was ruled out. It was a contact-transmitted virus. Dr. Leslie reported the situation to her supervisor, who promised to rush back after the meeting. Leslie had no choice but to conceal the existence of the book for now, or she'd be dismissed as delusional. The strangest part of all was Harry. His condition hadn't changed at all, and perhaps he was the key to solving this. Dr. Leslie entered Harry's room, and he had already learned of the housekeeper's death. Leslie just wanted answers. She didn't have much time left either. Harry felt immense sorrow. Leslie was the only doctor who had truly respected him. He then began to recount everything that had happened. Last night, while reading the book, Harry had become completely absorbed in the realistic story, unable to forget it upon waking. He hadn't expected to wake up like this. Leslie listened, but still didn't have a clue. The doctor urged her to proceed with the tests. Harry kept pleading for her forgiveness, but Dr. Leslie's condition had worsened. The nurse had contracted the virus as well. Dr. Leslie asked how the book had dealt with the virus. However, the people in the book never found a cure, and the author didn't even write a happy ending. At that moment, Leslie had a sudden realization. It was Harry who had given the virus life. If he could harness this imagination, he could create an antidote. The problem was how to execute it. Leslie saw the newspaper on the table. A fictional disease needed a fictional cure. They could use the meteor shower mentioned in the paper to rewrite a happy ending. She immediately called her supervisor. After explaining the plan, the supervisor agreed. Leslie entered the room and mentioned the news from the previous night. A meteor had hit Earth that morning. Harry scoffed, thinking it was impossible. It should have been felt. Leslie repeated the story she had already fabricated. The meteor wasn't large, only hitting Central America and destroying 11 rural villages. Harry became even more anxious. This could be a disaster. But Leslie believed it was a miracle. Medical staff wheeled in a box. They had found a rare element at the meteor impact site that could be used to create a virus-killing serum. Harry stared at them in disbelief, wondering what if the cure didn't work. Dr. Leslie urged him to trust her. If Harry didn't test the vaccine, everyone in the building would die. Harry finally agreed to trust Dr. Leslie. After the vaccine was injected, it didn't have the immediate effect they had hoped for. The patient's conditions continued to worsen, and Leslie's own health weakened. Just then, she was awakened by a voice. She looked up in shock. Harry's skin tumors had disappeared, and his body had returned to normal. The two of them laughed in excitement, but then Harry suddenly remembered something. What if the disease returned? Dr. Leslie couldn't focus on Harry any longer. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw that all the other patients had fully recovered. The antidote had only been saline solution. She eagerly tried to call her supervisor to share the good news, but she couldn't get through. He should have been right outside. She rushed to open the hospital doors, and what she saw took her breath away. The world outside was unbearably cold, and the entire city was frozen in snow and ice. Leslie had thought she had come up with a brilliant plan, using a fictional medicine to combat a fictional disease. But just like the virus itself, it had become a reality. Harry believed the cure was real, and the meteor had truly struck the Earth. The 19th story begins with a magician who was about to perform a 30-foot free fall. As he watched the blades below start to spin, he made the leap without hesitation. In the astonished gaze of the audience, the magician walked out from behind the curtain, but he was not satisfied with just that. There was only one great magic trick in the world, the Pharaoh's curse. Magician Mario had just received the videotape. In the footage, the two performers entered glass boxes. The newcomer Harry would enter the box on the right, while the old magician entered the box on the left. They would then spin through the air continuously, eliminating the possibility of using mirrors or fireboard doors. When they descended, Harry emerged from the left box, and the two had somehow swapped places. This magic trick had only been performed once in each era, and no one had ever figured it out. The old magician passed the trick on to Harry, and afterward, Harry became a global superstar. Whoever learned the Pharaoh's curse would become the greatest magician of the modern age. Harry was nearing retirement, and Mario believed he was the best candidate. After saying goodbye to his girlfriend, Mario drove to an estate, only to be turned away by a woman who claimed Harry was resting due to ill health. Mario refused to leave, knowing the videotape contained the Pharaoh's curse. Suddenly, Harry appeared. Seeing his idol in front of him, Mario immediately began discussing the recently performed trick. Harry wasn't interested in talking, introducing the woman as Shannon, and then preparing to escort Mario off the estate. Mario, still excited, guessed that they must have worn each other's human skin masks to have swapped positions so seamlessly. Shannon urged him to leave, but seeing that, he quickly changed tactics and performed a floating trick. Despite his performance, Harry remained unfazed. Just as Mario was about to give up, he was stopped by a pair of handcuffs. Harry didn't want to hear any more of Mario's rambling. Mario had the qualifications to inherit the trick, but Harry needed to observe him for a few days first. He then instructed Shannon to prepare a guest room. Mario had secured the opportunity, but now he found himself curious about Shannon. He learned that she had only been living there for 5 years. Mario began subtly hinting that Harry was getting old, while he himself was still young. The atmosphere grew tense, and Mario felt he might have a chance. Shannon reminded him to rest well, and he reluctantly agreed. The following days were filled with intense training. Harry constantly guided him, helping him improve his physical reflexes. Because of the spinning boxes, Mario needed to get used to the rotations. At one point, a bag was placed over his head, and Harry timed the ordeal, watching the seconds tick by. The oxygen inside the bag was gradually depleted, and Mario could only breathe again once the target time was reached. Harry knew Mario wasn't happy with the exercise, but this trick was nothing like jumping into a rubber fan. The Pharaoh's curse was something entirely different. Despite this, Mario was furious. Harry's constant criticism got under his skin, but then Shannon appeared behind him, reassuring him that he could succeed, maybe even surpass Harry. Mario instantly understood what she was implying. She was offering him an invitation to play a hormone game. After what felt like an eternity, Mario was exhausted, but his curiosity still burned. He grabbed a flashlight and made his way downstairs. This was the theater where Harry performed. 2 glass boxes were placed on the stage, and Mario tried to find the secret mechanism but couldn't find anything. He wanted to climb into one of the boxes to investigate, but just as he approached, the door behind him slammed shut. Panicked, Mario shouted for help, feeling the air being sucked out of the room. As his face turned red from the lack of oxygen, Harry suddenly appeared before him. Mario regained his composure and realized he had somehow ended up in the left box. He had checked all the props earlier. Harry explained that this wasn't a trick, it was real magic. If he hadn't opened the door in time, Mario would have died inside. This trick required 2 people to perform it. Mario felt guilty. All he wanted was to uncover the truth, to understand the secrets behind it. Seeing that he wasn't willing to give up, Harry explained that this trick was like a gift. The glass boxes were the magic itself. No one could take them away. They could only be passed down. Harry had actually been watching Mario for a while. He had the right mindset to be the greatest magician, someone who could deceive the audience with ease. Mario was eager to learn more about the Pharaoh's curse. Harry patiently explained, hinting that Mario should figure things out quickly since he was about to retire. The implication was clear. From the start, Harry had chosen Mario, and the videotape had been sent to him for that very reason. Tomorrow night, Harry would invite some friends over for one last performance, after which he would pass on the Pharaoh's curse to Mario. Mario was deeply moved and thanked Harry, though he still felt some doubt. Harry wasn't just indifferent to their situation. He truly was retiring, and his life was about to change. He hoped Shannon would be there to share it with him. Shannon agreed. At that moment, Harry bid farewell to his old friends. Tonight, he would leave one last gift. The Pharaoh's curse, a magic trick performed only once in each era, had been passed down through the centuries. Because the trick required 2 performers, it was impossible for one person to perform it alone. Harry introduced Mario to the audience as his partner. Mario stepped onto the stage amidst applause, his face brimming with excitement. After everything was set, Mario asked if Harry's health was all right. Harry simply said goodbye. Frozen in place, Mario watched as Harry walked to the left glass box, handing his cane to Shannon since he no longer needed it. As Mario stared in disbelief, the two boxes ascended into the air, filled with gas, and began spinning rapidly. When the boxes descended again, Shannon opened the doors and Mario walked out. The audience cheered, clapping enthusiastically. The magic trick was undeniably a success. It's then revealed the Pharaoh's curse wasn't just a simple swap of positions, it was a swap of bodies. Harry performed the trick once every 30 years, and Shannon often did so as well. The supposed passing down was just a trap. Mario felt a sharp pain in his back as Harry handed him the cane. This was the world of the young, and Mario was truly on his way to becoming a legend. But when he finally reached the peak of his ambition, he realized that he had aged far beyond his years. The 20th story begins with a girl, Danielle, who had an entire cabinet full of dolls, yet she had locked them all away. The new nanny, Miranda, was puzzled. Just then, a noise came from behind her, and one of the dolls fell over. She tried to catch it, but Danielle quickly stopped her, saying she had to be very careful with that, then took the key from the box. The doll looked strangely eerie. As soon as Danielle set it back upright, it quickly retracted, and her hand was scratched by the doll's sharp edges. Miranda thought it was just a cut from the glass, reassuring her that dolls didn't bite before pulling her downstairs to stop the bleeding. Danielle explained all these dolls had names, and the doll Shelly bit her because she hadn't been playing with her. She's jealous. Danielle only wanted to play with Miranda now, and to avoid Shelly seeing them, they should go downstairs. Miranda agreed without hesitation. As they were about to leave, Danielle glanced back at the cabinet and quickly shut the door. Miranda was ready with some chocolates. Danielle had been excited, but then remembered Shelly didn't like chocolate, unlike the doll next to Shelly, the one wearing a ski outfit. They had gone skiing together before, and that doll had been afraid of the dark. Danielle always kept a nightlight on at night. She started explaining the personalities of the dolls, which Miranda found intriguing. Danielle admitted that was often the case, but sometimes it wasn't. Anyway, Miranda was her best friend now. Miranda was left confused, but Danielle suddenly remembered she had forgotten a game and rushed back to her room. After she left, Miranda pulled out a book from her bag and highlighted a passage saying, "Lonely children often imagine friends and engage in antisocial behavior." Danielle seemed to fit part of that description. Just then, a scream echoed from upstairs. Miranda hurried into the room and found that Shelly had disappeared from the cabinet. Danielle blamed Miranda for not taking the key out, which allowed Shelly to escape. Miranda thought the child was just playing pretend and asked where she went. Since Shelly liked the dark, they could try searching somewhere darker. Miranda tried to lock the cabinet again, but the key was missing. Danielle was sure Shelly had taken it. Danielle suggested they check the parents' room, as it was darker and she wasn't allowed in there. Miranda reluctantly went in to search, but didn't find anything unusual. The doll might have gone downstairs. As they entered the kitchen, Miranda stepped on a broken cup. She assumed Danielle had caused it and that it could hurt someone. Danielle denied it, explaining that Shelly didn't like chocolate, which is why she was angry and broke the cup. Miranda proposed that Shelly might be angry because she had been locked away. Danielle didn't think so. Dolls were fragile and they had to be cared for like children. Shelly had escaped before and even broke their mother's teapot. Miranda just felt that dolls shouldn't be locked in cabinets. Seeing that Danielle wasn't understanding, she turned to leave, but suddenly tripped and fell. Miranda rushed to check on her, only to find that the thing on the floor was Shelly, who had escaped. Concerned for her ward's safety, Miranda was about to call the mother. Danielle insisted on putting Shelly back in the cabinet, but she wouldn't listen. Miranda quickly dialed the number but didn't mention the doll. Instead, she asked where the first aid kit was, while Danielle sat on the stairs, determined to return Shelly to the cabinet. When they entered the room, they were shocked to find that all the dolls had escaped. Miranda assumed Danielle had hidden them, but Danielle insisted she hadn't. Shelly had deliberately misdirected them so she could return and unlock the cabinet. As Miranda suspected Danielle was still pretending, she grabbed Danielle and pulled her out of the room. But just as they stepped outside, they saw a doll sitting on the banister. Miranda thought it was just another of Danielle's tricks, so she picked up a few dolls from the stairs. She was still wondering how Danielle was doing this when Danielle pointed to the pile of dolls in front of them, all staring at them with wide eyes. At that moment, Miranda noticed a vase had fallen and quickly pulled Danielle back. She looked up in shock to see a small hand emerging from the wreckage. The culprit was Shelly. Before Miranda could react, she picked up a bracelet from the shards, and Danielle snatched it away, slipping it onto her wrist. Miranda was about to call Danielle's parents when she noticed something terrifying. All the dolls had moved, their eyes now fixed on the two of them. She quickly dialed the number, but there was no sound on the line. The phone cord had been cut. Then, she remembered her cell phone in her bag, only to find the battery had been removed. Miranda was frozen in fear, thinking she was seeing things. She was determined to get Danielle out of there, but when she turned around, Danielle was gone, and there was a note on the door saying she'd left. It was clear that the dolls were behind all of this. Miranda couldn't understand why they were doing this, but she had to take Danielle and leave. As she reached the stairs, Miranda stopped dead in her tracks. The dolls had all gathered on the stairs, blocking her way up. She heard Danielle's voice crying for help from upstairs, and Miranda rushed up, but was suddenly stopped by a white unicorn figurine. She stumbled, falling down the stairs. When she came to, she realized she was being dragged by something. She reached down and pulled herself forward, only to find the dolls holding her back, keeping her from going upstairs. But Danielle's cries for help continued. Miranda pushed the dolls aside and, grabbing the unicorn figurine, charged into the room. Danielle was hiding in the closet, shaking with fear, while 3 dolls blocked the door. Miranda quickly shoved them out of the way and comforted Danielle, telling her to open the door. Danielle immediately flung the door open and pulled Miranda inside the closet with her. They needed to escape the house as quickly as possible, but Danielle suddenly saw the white unicorn figurine. She became unusually agitated, and then, out of nowhere, a wallet fell to the floor. Danielle picked it up, puzzled, and found a photo inside. The woman in the photo was wearing a bracelet identical to Danielle's. Miranda's hair stood on end. It all clicked for Miranda. The dolls had all once been nannies. They were hired to care for Danielle, but instead, they had stayed behind forever. The dolls had been warning Miranda to leave, not to harm Danielle. But now, it was too late. Danielle grabbed her tightly, and Miranda's body began to stiffen. Slowly, she transformed into a doll herself, her form becoming rigid. Meanwhile, the other dolls were locked away by Danielle, never to escape again. They had a new friend now. Miranda had thought she could help Danielle overcome her fear, but in the end, she realized that Danielle was the fear itself. She had ended up in a glass prison, just like the others before her. The 21st story begins with Janet, a woman with facial deformities, having been forced into cosmetic surgery by the state simply because she was deemed unbearably ugly. She spent nearly all of her time in the hospital, her head wrapped in thick bandages. She had lost track of day and night, only learning about the outside world from the nurses. She often asked when the bandages would be removed, but the nurses couldn't give her an answer. Janet knew she was horribly ugly. Even if there were people uglier than her, it didn't change the fact that she was very, very unattractive. In her desperation, she grabbed a nurse's arm. People had disliked her since she was a child. She could no longer stand the agony and wanted to tear off the bandages. The nurse tried to calm her down, gently placing a thermometer in her mouth. Still, there was no definite answer. After all, Janet had already waited this long. A few more days or even weeks wouldn't make much difference. The nurse went to the front desk to vent to a colleague, complaining that if her face looked like Janet's, she'd rather bury herself in a grave. Her colleague agreed, saying they wouldn't even dare to go near her if the bandages weren't covering her face. Soon, the doctor arrived in Janet's room, and the nurse reported that Janet had shown no unusual reactions to the latest round of injections. The doctor reassured her that the bandages would be removed soon. This was the 9th injection. Janet corrected the doctor, saying it was actually the 11th. She didn't blame the doctor for the mistake, but after so many failed attempts, perhaps the bandages were her only hope. If no one could see her face, maybe the surgery would have been a success, even if it wasn't in the way she had hoped. The doctor, trying to avoid further discouraging her, said they couldn't know the outcome until the bandages were removed. This would be the last time, however. After that, no more treatment would be possible. Janet understood what that meant. If this attempt didn't work, what would happen then? The doctor mentioned a backup plan. There were many others in the world like Janet, some even uglier. If the surgery failed, the state would allow her to return to live with others of her kind. Janet fiercely rejected the idea of living with monsters, but the doctor had done everything they could, and the state had given her 11 rounds of treatment. She had to accept reality. She could never appear in normal society, even with a mask. This was the state's policy, and they had to comply with its regulations. Janet retorted that the state wasn't God and didn't have the right to make ugliness a crime. The doctor warned her to stop such talk, or the consequences would be severe. Janet pressed her face into her hands, falling silent. She then walked over to the window, trying to feel the outside world, though even the scent of flowers seemed like a luxury. She became more anxious, repeatedly asking to have the bandages removed. The doctor quickly intervened, and the nurse rushed in as well. Together, they managed to pin her down on the bed. The doctor finally decided it was time to remove the bandages, instructing the anesthetist to be ready in case Janet went into shock upon seeing her face. The nurse reported that everything was prepared. The doctor had invested so much effort into trying to help Janet. Now, they could only hope for a miracle. He had already seen the face under the bandages, and it was, in fact, quite a nice face, a human face. The nurse understood the doctor's feelings, but she had to admit that Janet looked more like a human when her face was covered. The doctor was furious. This case had completely thrown him off balance. Only by removing the bandages could he restore his sense of equilibrium. As the leader's speech played live on TV, Janet was about to have her bandages removed. The doctor reminded her to stay calm. Any sudden movements would prompt the anesthetist to inject a sedative. Janet promised she wouldn't move. The doctor began cutting through the first layer of bandages. The world was no longer dark. She could see a faint grayish light. Then came the second layer of bandages. Now she could see the lights more clearly and the doctor's blurry outline. It was time for the final layer. Janet needed to remember one thing. Everyone had tried their best. If the surgery was successful, they would all be happy. Even if it wasn't, she could still live among others of her kind. But Janet didn't want to give up. She asked if there were any other options. Considering all factors, the doctor explained that, aside from transferring her to an autonomous region, there were no other alternatives. He stopped explaining further. As the last layer of bandages slowly came off, Janet's face was still covered with the molds from the surgery. Everyone in the room was on edge. The doctor carefully ripped off the final gauze. Janet touched her face and completely broke down. She tried to rush out of the room but was stopped. The doctor had already anticipated this reaction. The nurse quickly turned on the lights and everyone in the room revealed their grotesque faces. The anesthetist moved closer, but Janet pushed the doctor aside and ran out. On the TV, the leader was promoting the only standard. They could not allow ugliness to exist and it must be completely eradicated. The entire hospital staff mobilized to capture Janet. As they rushed into the room, Janet was startled by the person in front of her. The doctor gently reassured her not to be afraid. The man was a representative from the autonomous region. He was far uglier than Janet, but he wouldn't harm anyone. Janet still couldn't bear to look at him, only wanting to return to a normal life. The representative insisted that he wasn't scary and that the village consisted of friendly people. It wasn't such a terrible thing. Once she arrived, Janet would feel an incredible sense of belonging and experience being loved. Despite his words, Janet remained terrified and begged the doctor not to leave, but she was already being transferred. The representative gently reminded her that once she packed her things, she could leave at any time. Janet only wanted one answer. Why were some people born so ugly? The representative didn't know the answer, but he explained that it didn't really matter. He recalled an old saying, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder." In the end, Janet grabbed the representative's hand, and together they walked past the others. In this world, ugliness was the standard, while beauty defied logic. If there was one clear answer, it was that there was no real difference. The 22nd story begins with a death row inmate, Finch, who was about to be executed by lethal injection, charged with the murder of a convenience store owner, but he insisted on his innocence. Even though he was tightly strapped to the operating table with a belt, Finch still refused to confess. The victim's family members were furious. There were eyewitnesses, the victim's son who had confirmed that Finch had killed his father. So why wouldn't he admit the truth? Eventually, the judge decided to proceed with the anesthesia. The liquid slowly flowed into Finch's arm and he broke down, desperately pleading that he hadn't harmed anyone. At that moment, a voice suddenly interrupted. The lawyer stared in shock at the scene. The judge angrily answered a phone call. The injection equipment was malfunctioning and the execution had to be delayed. Finch let out a sigh of relief. Due to technical issues, there was a chance his execution could be postponed by a year, giving him time to attempt another appeal. But Finch's mind was fixated on that mysterious voice. His lawyer was puzzled, asking what was that. As the only person who believed him, Finch murmured about a woman who had whispered that the time wasn't right. The lawyer thought it was just auditory hallucinations from the intense pressure. There was no such thing as a guardian angel in the real world. The judge opened the door, signaling that they were ready to try again. Finch couldn't hold back anymore. This wasn't a lottery prize, and he definitely didn't want to go through it again. Even though the lawyer suggested delaying the execution, the judge insisted on proceeding. They had brought in brand new equipment. Finch had no choice but to walk toward the operating table, surrounded by those familiar, cold faces. The victim's son just wanted to watch him die. Finch repeated to himself, begging not to let this happen. An ethereal female voice echoed in his mind. Dazed, Finch woke up on the floor. The judge received an urgent call. There was a power outage and fire in the building, and they had to start the evacuation procedures. Finch narrowly escaped once again. Fire trucks arrived at the prison, and the crowd outside started changing their tune. It must have been God protecting Finch, saving him from 2 death sentences, proving that he was innocent. The crowd started chanting to save Finch. The next day, the story made the headlines, and public opinion began to swing in his favor. Finch had been awake all night. With so many death row inmates in the country, why was it him? It wasn't just because he was innocent. Something was keeping him alive. Finch had a strange feeling that this wasn't the government's decision. The judge was still carrying out the death sentence, but now it would be an electric shock. Finch had one last chance to confess. Finch looked at the familiar faces in front of him and urged them to begin. Seeing his defiant attitude, the staff quickly pulled the power switch, and the room was immediately filled with sparks as the entire system short-circuited. The judge quickly ordered the power to be cut. Finch realized he had truly been spared, and he let out an ecstatic laugh. From that moment on, he started living freely. He even slept soundly that night and smoked in his cell. The lawyer thought it was just a coincidence, but Finch ate his breakfast, completely unafraid. The lawyer watched as he drew angels on the paper, angels that he had glimpsed during his last electric shock. Though it was only a fleeting image, he had seen the wings. He believed this was his guardian angel. The lawyer didn't want to hear any more of this. They had a press conference soon, and the witness was willing to withdraw his testimony. Finch needed to act innocent and not mention the guardian angel, as he might have a chance to avoid the death penalty. Finch agreed, and at the press conference, the existence of the angel was confirmed. People began to believe that the innocent would be freed. The press conference ended, and Finch's fame began to grow. He might be able to build a career from this, but just as he was thinking about his newfound attention, the victim's son suddenly appeared in front of him, ready to pull the trigger, but the gun jammed. Police quickly stepped in and restrained the man. Finch became more convinced that his angel was protecting him, insisting that no one could kill him. He was then brought to court, smiling broadly. Finch didn't dwell on the gun incident, hoping that the police would catch the real killer. The trial hadn't even begun, and he was already preparing to write his autobiography and start a nationwide speaking tour. The lawyer was speechless. He hadn't even been declared innocent yet. Finch, however, wanted to share his revelation with the world. The lawyer still believed it was all luck and coincidence. Even though she had witnessed everything firsthand, she couldn't believe in any guardian angel. Meanwhile, after the jury's deliberation, the judge ruled Finch not guilty. The victim's family broke down in tears, and Finch finally felt at peace. Outside, the press had gathered, and Finch was free to go. Now he could prepare to use his newfound fame and his supposed angel to make something of himself. The lawyer suddenly realized something was wrong. He had previously claimed that he had never entered the convenience store. Finch confirmed this, stating that at first he hadn't wanted to kill the old man, but the man refused to hand over the money. The lawyer couldn't bring herself to believe he was telling the truth. Finch insisted that he was right. He had to kill the old man. Otherwise, he would never realize the fate he was meant to follow. But the truth was, he had killed someone and destroyed a once happy family. Yet Finch felt no remorse. He glanced at the reporters outside. His career was just beginning, and it wasn't yet time for him to face the consequences. Finch quickly stepped out the door, soaking in the flashing lights and applause. The crowd cheered for him, and he walked on, having narrowly escaped death multiple times. As he reflected on his journey, from being strapped to the operating table to surviving the electric shock, it all seemed to come down to his guardian angel. As long as he was alive, anything was possible. Suddenly, a rope from the upper floor snapped, and a statue came crashing down. The lawyer rushed forward, but froze in place. Finch was struck dead by the statue. Truth and justice were inseparable. In the very moment of his death, Finch realized it wasn't a matter of not yet, but that there was no avoiding his fate. This wasn't a guardian angel. It was the vengeful goddess of justice. The 23rd story begins with a group of college students digging for treasure in a mountain cave. They had been following a map for days, and finally, they unearthed a chest. Covered in strange symbols, the group excitedly speculated about what kind of prize might be inside. But the girl, Amber, noticed something odd. The treasure hunting website had claimed the chest was buried just a month ago, yet it looked far older than that. At her suggestion, Martin brushed away the dirt on top and revealed the original carvings. What he saw made his eyes widen in disbelief. He muttered these were Aztec symbols. They worshipped the sun god. This could be from 16th century Mexico. Maybe this area was once the northern border of the Aztec Empire. These markings prove it. What they had found wasn't just a gimmick for a treasure hunt, it was an ancient artifact, possibly even filled with gemstones. Amber cautiously turned the sculpted human face on the chest, but nothing seemed to happen. Then, the chest gave a slight shudder. Everyone jumped. Martin wasted no time opening the lid and pulled out an old ceramic jar. Disappointment washed over them. It wasn't even made of gold. But Martin noticed how heavy it felt. Amber began untying the rope wrapped around it. Curious, Martin peeked inside and froze. The jar was filled with diabetic blood. Everyone's expressions twisted in shock. Amber dipped a finger in to confirm. No doubt about it, it was blood. But that didn't make sense. Blood from 500 years ago should have dried up long ago. Before anyone could make sense of it, the girl Eve decided to film the creepy discovery. But as she lifted the jar, it slipped from her hands and crashed to the ground. The blood spilled out across the cave floor. As they all stared in stunned silence, Amber noticed something terrifying. Everything around them was getting darker. The light continued to dim until they were left in total darkness. They rushed out of the cave, only to find the sun was gone. But it wasn't even noon yet, and this wasn't an eclipse. There was no corona behind the moon. Before they could react further, Amber felt an intense chill down her butt. It wasn't just in her head. Her body was getting colder by the second. 2 hours later, the radio was broadcasting emergency news. The sun had vanished. Scientists couldn't explain it. Surface temperatures were plummeting. In Greenland, it had dropped below -90 degrees Celsius. The president called an emergency press conference. The group huddled together, shivering. Eve tried to call home, but there was no signal. They believed the sun had no reason to disappear. Amber insisted that scientists must be working on an explanation, but Martin was already convinced, saying they had caused the sun's disappearance. The others stared at him, confused. Martin explained he wasn't sure before if that was really an Aztec chest. But now there's only one explanation. The Aztecs worshipped the sun god. They must have buried that box as some kind of seal, and they broke it. When the blood spilled, the sun vanished. Eve scoffed, saying, "It's probably just a coincidence." But Martin replied he couldn't shake the feeling this was all connected. Eve's boyfriend didn't want to stick around to find out, suggesting they should just get out of here and go home. But Amber pointed out a grim reality. They are 30 miles from town. Climbing down this mountain in total darkness is way too dangerous. And this wasn't even the worst-case scenario yet. If the sun doesn't come back in a few days, the Earth's atmosphere will start to leak into space. Temperatures will drop to -150 degrees Celsius. Everything will freeze. And even if they find a way to stay warm, the air will get thinner and thinner until they can't breathe. Amber asked what they should do next. Martin brought up the ancient hieroglyphs again. One person needed to be sacrificed. All of their blood had to be poured into the cup and buried in its original place. Eve's boyfriend immediately protested, and the sidekick boy was furious. But the ritual demanded a real sacrifice. It wasn't just a matter of a finger prick. It required someone to die. Just then, Martin found a knife inside the box. Now even the weapon was ready. Panic spread. Everyone stared wide-eyed. The sidekick boy tried to calm them down, insisting they couldn't just turn on each other like this. There had to be another way. They still had enough supplies to last a few days. Amber encouraged everyone to rest for the night. Maybe the sun would rise tomorrow. They rushed off to gather wood and build a fire. By now, the sun had been gone for 13 hours. Around the world, death tolls continued to rise, triggering riots and widespread looting. The broadcast would continue until the power cut out. Eve started blaming herself. If she hadn't knocked over that cup of blood, maybe none of this would have happened. Amber didn't respond. The truth was, they were all thinking the same thing. And by 6 a.m. the next day, the sun still hadn't come back. Eve's boyfriend declared it was the end of the world. No one was getting out alive. But Amber didn't believe that. If Martin was right, they had to try to save the world. Not just for each other, but for their families, too. It was their only shot. First, they had to decide who would be the sacrifice. The sidekick boy refused with disgust. Eve's boyfriend wanted nothing to do with it. They were all close friends, but someone had to make the call. If one life could save billions, maybe it was a price worth paying. Still, no one stepped forward. The air was thinning. They had to act fast. Amber took charge and suggested drawing lots. The short stick would mean the chosen one. The group hesitantly agreed. Amber held out a handful of sticks. Martin, after a long hesitation, picked a long one. The tension on his face said it all. Amber urged the next person to step up. Eve's boyfriend reached out with shaking hands, but the sidekick boy quickly moved ahead and drew a long stick, stepping back in relief. Only 3 sticks remained. Eve's boyfriend slowly drew his. It was also long. Now it was down to Amber and Eve. Eve, holding her breath, picked the one on the left. To her horror, it was the short stick. She stood frozen. Eve's boyfriend couldn't face his girlfriend. Eve turned desperately to her best friends, begging for help, but who would willingly die in her place? Finally, Eve broke down. The silence was suffocating. It felt like a death sentence. She tried to make a run for it, but there was a heavy thud behind her. Blood streamed from the back of her head. The sidekick boy had struck her. He pinned her to the ground. Martin, clutching the knife, moved in. The boy, staring at his girlfriend, couldn't bring himself to intervene. Seeing no help coming, Martin made the fatal blow. They had once been so close, and now they were drowning in grief. The sidekick boy could never wash the blood from his hands. Amber stood frozen, staring at Eve's lifeless body. Martin buried the box again. Eve's boyfriend watched the footage from the camera, consumed with guilt. He whispered endless apologies to his girlfriend. Then, sunlight streamed into the cave. The sun had returned. Overcome with joy, they rushed outside, basking in its warmth. All around the world, people were celebrating. The radio crackled to life again. An observatory reported that the sun's disappearance had been caused by the Earth passing through a rare, low-temperature plasma zone. Their smiles faded instantly because they believed they should have saved the world. The sidekick boy knew the truth. They had killed Eve for nothing. Eve's boyfriend broke down completely. Martin insisted they had done what was necessary. Whether the sun's return was coincidence or consequence, he believed their sacrifice had worked. Amber wasn't so sure. The warmth had returned to the world, but all they could feel was a deep, unshakable chill. Haunted by unanswered questions, they couldn't find peace. From the moment the light vanished, they had already fallen into darkness. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.